Aquarius. There are moments in the day when everything seems to move along its familiar path, and yet, somewhere inside you, something quietly pauses, just for a second. You're not sure why. It's not exactly a memory, just a feeling, as if someone gently brushed across your thoughts and was gone before you could even name it. You keep going, you reply to messages, you finish what needs to be done. On the outside, nothing really changes. But a little deeper down, there's a small space of stillness, one you don't rush to fill. And maybe what makes it stay with you is not because it's clear, but because it isn't. A feeling without a reason, a presence without a form. And if you've ever felt something like that, then you might understand why this story doesn't begin with a specific person, but with something much harder to name. There are days when everything flows so smoothly, you barely have to think at all. Work feels the same. Conversations keep going. Life moves at its familiar pace. You move through a morning, then an afternoon. The same way you've moved through so many days before. And then, in a very small moment, something gently touches somewhere inside you. Not clear enough to name, not strong enough to stop you, but not something that disappears either. It's like driving down a road you know by heart, and suddenly an old song begins to play. Not one you chose, not one you were looking for. It just appears right when you don't expect it, and you realize you're listening. Aquarius isn't usually the type to be led by emotion. You observe, you analyze. You want to understand things before you allow yourself to believe in them. A vague feeling normally wouldn't be enough to make you pause. But this time, it feels different. There's no clear question, no specific reason, just a very light presence, as if someone passed through your mind for a moment, leaving behind the faintest trace. But enough for you to notice. You don't try to hold on to it. You don't rush to push it away. You simply know it happened. And maybe what makes that moment stay with you isn't about who you were thinking of, but how you felt it. A feeling that doesn't need to be right or wrong, doesn't need an explanation. It simply exists. Maybe in a world where everything demands a reason, the things that don't are the ones that lead us to the deepest parts of ourselves. A place with no logic, no plan. Just a very subtle connection between you and something you can't quite name. And maybe it's in moments like this, when you're not trying to understand everything, not trying to control anything, you quietly open a small door, leading you toward feelings you may have never allowed yourself to feel before. Not to search for answers, but simply to realize that some things in life don't need to be clear to touch you in a very real way. There are stories that don't end with a period, no final conversation, no clear goodbye. No one stays long enough to truly understand what was really happening. Everything just stops, softly, like a door left slightly open, never fully closed, but never opened again. Aquarius tends to see things through a lens of logic. If something ends, there should be a reason. But over time, you begin to realize not every answer comes in a clear form like that. There are connections that never lacked feeling. It's just that no one was ready enough to hold on to them. There may have been someone who stood very close to you, close enough that one more step could have changed everything. But that step never happened. Not because they didn't want to. Maybe because they didn't know what to say first. Sometimes emotions feel like a rising wave. When they come, they don't ask if you're ready. And not everyone knows how to stand steady in something that deep. So they choose silence. They choose to hold it in. They choose to let things pass in a way that feels a little easier to manage. And then, time begins to do its part. New days arrive, other stories begin. Life, in its quiet way, pulls each person in a different direction. No one is wrong, nothing is truly lost. It's just that a part of that story was never spoken out loud. And what's interesting is, the things left unsaid are often the ones that stay the longest. Not as clear memories, not as specific details, but as a feeling, a kind of familiarity you can't quite explain. a slight heaviness in your chest, when something distant briefly comes back to mind. Not enough to call it regret, but not something that completely fades either. And maybe, when you look back now, you're no longer trying to figure out what went wrong. You simply begin to see that some connections in life were never meant to complete a perfect story. They were there to touch you at a very specific moment, in a very deep way, and then quietly become a part of who you are as you grow. And when you look back at the things that were never fully said, you may begin to notice something more subtle. Not everyone who leaves has truly let go. Some people step out of the story very quietly. No noise, no clear sign that helps you understand what really happened. From the outside, it all seems simple. They leave, you stay, the story ends. But inside each person, things rarely unfold that neatly. They may have stood in front of a difficult choice, stay, and face what they weren't ready for, or leave and carry a feeling they didn't know where to place, and they chose to leave, not because they stopped caring, but maybe because that was the only way they knew to keep things from becoming more complicated. Aquarius understands this better than most. You've had moments too, when you had to choose with your mind, even when your heart hadn't fully agreed yet. You know that feeling, when your thoughts say, just keep going, but something in your chest wants to stay a little longer. And maybe that person was there too. They convinced themselves that leaving made sense, that time would make things lighter, that distance would slowly fade the feeling. But emotions don't always follow what we arrange for them. Some things don't disappear with time. They simply change the way they exist, no longer part of daily conversations, no longer present in familiar routines, but still, quietly there, in very private moments. A song you weren't expecting to hear again, a street you suddenly pass by, a feeling you can't quite name. When everything around you becomes a little more still than usual, they keep living their life, they keep moving forward. They learn to adapt to what's new, but somewhere inside, there's a part that hasn't fully closed. Not pain, not exactly regret, just a very light space, like a room that's been cleaned and cleared, yet still holds a trace of an old scent. And the quiet truth is, that feeling doesn't need to be resolved right away. There's no need to go back, no need to say what was left unsaid. It only needs to be acknowledged, that it existed, and in some way, it still carries a certain meaning. Maybe when we see someone leave, we assume they've stepped into a completely new chapter, but sometimes they're simply learning how to keep living while still carrying a piece of the past they haven't quite put down. And if you've ever wondered whether something truly ended or not, maybe the answer isn't about who walked away. Maybe it's about this, that some feelings, even when they're no longer spoken, still remain, in their own quiet way. And then, when you allow yourself to slow down for a moment, you begin to notice a different kind of connection. It's no longer present in your everyday life. No more conversations, no more familiar routines, no clear reason for it to appear again. And yet, it hasn't completely gone. There are connections that don't need constant contact to keep existing. They remain in their own quiet way. You no longer text them. Their name doesn't show up on your phone anymore. Their life slowly becomes something more distant. And you keep moving forward too. You walk your own path. You build new things. You meet new people. From the outside, it all looks like it's over. But inside, it's a different story. And there are people who, in a very natural way, still carry you in their memory, not as something they need to return to, not as a lingering sadness, but more like a marker, a stretch of road they once walked through, that quietly changed something within them. You may no longer be part of their present life, but you're still part of how they understand who they are. A memory that doesn't need to be repeated, but also can't be replaced. They may never talk about you, never mention your name in everyday conversations, but in certain quiet moments, when everything around them softens, they still remember how you once made them feel. Not clearly, no specific images, just a sense of familiarity, that time never fully erased. And what's interesting is, connections like this don't need to be maintained to stay alive. They don't depend on whether you still speak or not. They don't need constant presence. They exist because at one point in time, two people truly met at a level deeper than what could be seen. No need to go back, no need to continue. Just the simple truth that it was real. And sometimes that alone is enough for a connection to remain in a way that feels quietly complete. It doesn't disturb your present. It doesn't pull you back into the past. It simply rests there, very gently, as a small part of both of your journeys of becoming. And when you think about it, you may no longer see endings as something lost, but as something transformed. A connection that no longer needs to appear, yet still exists in the quietest way, and perhaps the deepest way. And when you sit with it long enough, the story no longer feels like it's about someone out there. It begins to turn back toward you, not in a loud way, but like a very gentle mirror, placed in front of the feelings you've already lived through. You've held someone in your heart before. No need to name them. No need to remember every detail. Just when they come to mind, you know they were there, in a very real way. Not to go back, not to hold on to what has already passed, but more like a book you once read, one you don't open every day anymore, yet still keep in a place of its own, a place you wouldn't replace, because it once made you pause, made you think, made you see things a little differently. There are people like that. They don't stay in your life, but they stay in the way you feel the world. You don't search for them anymore. You don't ask yourself, what if things had gone differently? You simply acknowledge that they mattered, in a way that doesn't need explaining. Maybe it's how they helped you open up, or how they helped you realize what truly matters to you. Or maybe it was just a moment in time when you were more honest, more alive than you had been before. And then, slowly, with time, the feeling begins to change. It's no longer something that weighs you down, not something that keeps you unsettled, just a light memory, like the last light of the day, no longer bright, but still warm enough to feel. You don't need to go back there. You don't need to hold on to it tightly. You simply carry a piece of something that was once real. And maybe what matters most isn't whether that person stayed or left. But that, for a certain moment in your life, you allowed yourself to connect. You allowed yourself to feel. You allowed yourself to open, even if it was only for a moment, because not everyone gets to do that. And when you look back now, you no longer ask, why didn't it continue? You simply begin to understand that some people enter your life not to stay forever, but to leave a mark deep enough to change who you become. And then, as all the pieces begin to settle, you may find you're no longer seeing this story through the lens of who still remembers who. The question fades of whether someone hasn't fully let you go, because in a quiet way, that no longer feels so important. What remains is how you see everything you've lived through. There are connections in life that don't come to stay, but they don't leave in a way that completely disappears either. They're like a pause in a piece of music, not a sound, yet somehow they make the notes around them feel deeper. You don't have to go back to that part of the song to understand its value. Just knowing it was there and that it helped shape the whole journey into something more complete. Maybe somewhere out there, someone still carries a piece of memory about you, but that is not an invitation to return. It's not something that needs to be resolved. It's simply a quiet truth that what once held meaning doesn't easily disappear. And the most beautiful part is, you don't have to do anything with that. You don't have to search. You don't have to turn back. You don't have to reopen old questions. You just understand. And you understand that you walked through a part of your life where the feelings were real. You understand that you allowed yourself to open without knowing what would come next. You understand that even if it didn't continue, it still left behind something meaningful. Not as a clear ending, but as a quiet kind of growth. And maybe that is what stays the longest. Not a person, not a relationship, but the way you come to understand yourself after it all. You keep moving forward, not carrying the past as a weight, but carrying a deeper sensitivity in how you feel, a softer way of seeing things, and a kind of peace that feels entirely your own. When you realize you don't have to hold on to everything to appreciate what once was, And if you've stayed with this story until now, maybe you can feel something small shift inside. Now, not everything needs a clear ending to matter, and not every connection needs to continue to be complete. Sometimes, the fact that it was real is already enough. And from there, you continue your journey, a little lighter, a little deeper, and a little more in tune with yourself, in a very quiet way.